And European intelligence officials and senior Pakistan diplomats have accused the US of crying wolf after it issued a terror alert for Europe earlier this week. The UK's Guardian newspaper goes on to allege the actual purpose of the alert was to justify a recent increase in drone attacks inside Pakistan. Well, for more on this, I'm joined live from Frankfurt by historian F. William Engdahl. He's the author of Full Spectrum Dominance, Totalitarian Democracy in the New World Order. Thanks very much indeed for joining us here on RT. Now, as I've just mentioned, there are accusations that the alert was simply a justification for a rise in drone attacks inside Pakistan, as well as to justify America's troop surge in Afghanistan as well. What do you think? Do you agree with that reasoning?
Well, I think the main reason that I can figure out for the troop surge in Afghanistan is to have more security on the heroin routes going across Central Asia into Russia and on into Western Europe, because there is no military reason other than to present a staging area against China's future activities as well as Russia. So the Afghan war itself, the idea that American soldiers or NATO soldiers are going to bring anything stable to Afghanistan is absolute rubbish. I think a better name for Al-Qaeda would be Tricko, because I think this is something fabricated at convenience whenever the U.S. is having trouble revving other countries up for the war on terror, which is really a war for full spectrum dominance.
Well, let's talk about the impact on the stability, the global instability, in fact, this has all caused. And speaking of the threat itself, Washington was warning of possible commando-style attacks in European capitals, as we saw in Mumbai. Now, me as a citizen, if I go into a European capital and I'm warned of such an attack that could be imminent, I feel pretty hopeless, to be honest. I don't really know what I should do about it. So what about European governments? I mean, how can they prevent such attacks? How should they be reacting to these sort of threats?
Well, there's no 100% preventing of an isolated terrorist attack if it's going to happen. But intelligence experts around the world agree that most terrorism is state-sponsored terrorism. So you have to ask which state is benefiting, cui bono, from the constant warnings about Al-Qaeda attacks here and there. And it seems very convenient that just when Europe is expressing grave doubts about the NATO mission in Afghanistan, that these warnings come about these new attacks. And the only sources we have are U.S. intelligence interrogators. And
it's exactly for that reason the top NATO commander says that the terror alert for Europe actually underlines the need for the efforts in Afghanistan, that, of course, has become very unpopular in many countries who are involved in this fighting, in this conflict. So, in some ways, he's got a point, though, hasn't he?
Well, I think it's the opposite. The sooner that NATO pulls out of Afghanistan, the less you would have justification for that, if that were even the case. But I think the NATO commander is pushing a certain agenda, and it's the Pentagon agenda. That's one that has very little to do with Taliban or Al-Qaeda, if it even exists.
There is, of course, talk of, well, there's a promise of a gradual or a start of a withdrawal imminently in the next year. What do you think the consequences would be if we do see a gradual military withdrawal or indeed a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan? Would the world become less safe, or would it be safer without a military presence there, which is, according to many, actually provoking this violence and actually causing the terror threats around the world?
Well, I think the latter is more like the appropriate answer. The presence in Afghanistan has done nothing to make the world more secure, and it's certainly done nothing to make Afghanistan more stable. I have Afghani friends who tell me inside reports of what's going on with the U.S. soldier presence there. And we are propping up, NATO is propping up a government, the Karzai government, which is the largest opium warlord on the planet, 93% of all the heroin. And that's developed since the U.S. occupation in 2001. So one has to ask, when the official U.S. policy is no interdiction and destruction of opium fields in Afghanistan, which the Taliban actually did, what's going on here? Is this another Vietnam where the CIA is running drugs to finance terrorism and spread the war into Laos and Cambodia? Is that what we're doing in Kyrgyzstan and Manas Air Base and so forth? And these are some very serious questions that ought to be looked at, I think.
Well, you mentioned the CIA, and a former CIA official has recently said U.S. troops will leave Afghanistan by the 2012 U.S. election, because it's actually the only way for Obama to stay in office. So are we really talking about U.S. political interests at stake here rather than Afghanistan's interest in the long term?
Well, I wouldn't place too much stake on political analysis of anyone from the CIA, but I don't think a miracle of the second coming of Jesus could bring Obama into a second term. So I don't think the troop withdrawal is going to have any effect on that. But it won't happen. The Pentagon will have troops permanently stationed behind something like 15 permanent bases that they've built around the country, and most of those are air bases aimed at China, at Central Asia, and at Russia. Kazakhstan, the pipeline routes.
Just finally, can I go back to this the subject of these security threats? European security officials have been very critical of the US issuing these threats. I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's really helpful and useful to issue such security threats around the world? Some people may start thinking, well, this is a case of crying wolf, get complacent and take no interest at all and not take them at all seriously. I mean, are they worth carrying out these warnings?
Well, I don't think they really bring much of anything because they're so vaguely formulated, and frankly, the European patience is beginning to wear a little bit thin with Washington's cry wolf, as you call it. So I don't think they're particularly helpful.
Very interesting to hear what you have to say. German-American historian F. William Engdahl joining us live there in Frankfurt here on RT. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.